Hello, this is Dr. Marty Harris. Today's topic is Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, IDD. The federal disability category is officially called mental retardation. IDD is the newer term that is used in our book and will be used for our lectures. Let's take a look at the definition of IDD. Remembering that IDEA will call this disability mental retardation, let's look at their definition. IDEA's definition of MR: significantly sub-average intellectual functioning, existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior, and manifested during the developmental periods that adversely affects a child's educational performance. As you can see, the three main components are 1. Sub-average intellect, 2. Difficulty with adaptive behavior, 3. Starts during the developmental periods, in other words, when they are very young. The line, quote, adversely affects a child's educational performance, end quote, is used throughout IDEA as they define each disability. Let's look at the bell curve and think about what MR or IDD means on the bell curve. Significant sub-average intelligence is defined as below -2 standard deviation. Some states go as far as saying the definition is -1.5 standard deviation. Thus you see the yellow section becomes a little bit larger. Just by looking at the bell curve, you can understand that the number of people below -2 standard deviation is a small group compared to the whole population. It represents 2.3% of the whole population. Since the development of IQ testing, the IQ score was the one way we identified individuals with MR. Secondly, we would look at how they functioned, in other words, their adaptive behaviors. If the student was unable to function and adapt to his or her environment, then the diagnosis was complete. Historically, we relied on the IQ score to define MR and then to classify the students into different degrees of the disability. On this chart, you see proper terms for the different degrees of MR. But in years past, we had different terms. If you will remember from our history lesson, the French physicians in the 1700s came up with the terms idiot, imbecile, and moron for the 3 degrees of MR. My mom taught special education for 20 years in the same elementary school my whole family attended, including my mom and dad when they were young. During the 1950s and 60s, and even part of the 70s, we did use the term handicapped. My mom's class was called Primary EMH, which stood for Educable Mentally Handicapped. The word educable implied that these children could be taught some basics, including reading, basic living skills, simple jobs, and live a life with some form of help from others. These children's IQs ranged from mild to the top of the moderate level, according to this chart. The second term used in the 1950s and 60s was trainable mentally handicapped. Trainable included low, moderate to severe MR. The term trainable was very literal. It meant with intense training, these individuals could learn some skills, but would always need supervision and never live independently. Finally, I want to tell you about two other acronyms that we used concerning mental retardation. The acronyms were MIMR and MOMR. These acronyms were pronounced just as they are spelled, MIMR and MOMR. They stood for mild MR and moderate MR. These acronyms came about because we needed short terms for our paperwork. But just think how awful those terms would sound to a parent. Miss Ops class, the 1960s. Here is the only photo I have of my mom's class. They are standing on the second floor landing between staircases coming in from the front door. Above the doorway was a massive arched window. In the forefront of the photo are houses that the children had made to describe their neighborhood. In the background, it is a massive glass mosaic that depicts the history of the city of St. Louis. Ms. Opp had designed the mosaic, and my dad's stained glass window business happily donated lots of broken glass. Every student in the building, K through 8th grade, with 2 classes at each level, participated in the making of the mosaic. This included my mom's class. Perhaps the best part of the mosaic was the fact that every student in the elementary building came to my mom's class to participate with some very special students. The last time I visited my old elementary school, the mosaic was still there, and I could still hear the voices of the children having so much fun. When I was a college kid at Illinois State University, I was thrilled when I finally got to my first education course, art for the elementary. The professor wanted us to plan an art lesson and teach it. Of course, I wanted to teach in my mom's class, so I packed up my teaching materials and grabbed the bus to St. Louis. During the 5-hour ride, I wrote my lesson plans. We were going to learn about our faces, hair, eyes, eyebrows, noses, and smiles, and then draw fabulous self-portraits. The second part of my project was to rate the drawings for detail and compare those ratings to the students' IQs. In recent years, psychologists had designed a new test to help evaluate children's mental age. It was called Draw a Man. I couldn't wait to see what my project would teach me. Once the children settled down after afternoon recess, I opened my mystery suitcase, getting ready to teach, when there was a knock at the door, and in walked the principal and a second man. And in between these formal men in their serious black suits, holding their hands, was a chimpanzee. Needless to say, we learned about chimpanzees that day. It's called a teachable moment. So on my first day of real teaching, I learned the first rule of excellence. If you want to be a teacher, you must be flexible. So back on the bus I went, and the following week Mom did an experiential story with the children about spring pussy willows. They talked about the vase full of the fuzzy pussy willows and wrote a story together, practiced reading it, copied it, and added a picture. The rest of the story, Michelle. Here you see Michelle's drawing and her story. The testing information was based on ratio IQ. Remember that from our history lesson? Michelle was mischievous and very uncooperative. She had a significant speech articulation problem, very low skills, and extremely short attention span. Michelle had Down syndrome. As Daddy's little girl, she was used to getting her way, and he thought there was nothing wrong with his baby. To make the story a little more interesting, Daddy was a special education teacher at another school. The rest of the story, Margie. With a big, beautiful smile and big, beautiful eyes, Margie loved to joke around and loved to learn. She was a hard worker. She was 9 when she wrote this story, could read it and remember the details the next day. Margie's speech was hard to understand, but she paid attention well and worked hard at any assignment she was given. Margie also loved to help. One day, Mom said to me, "Watch this." Then she directed Margie to put some papers on the shelf in the back of the room. Then Mom dropped a stack of books on the floor. Everyone jumped but Margie. Every year, Mom wrote in her annual reports, quote, "I think Margie does not hear loud noises. I think Margie lip reads," end quote. Back then, teachers were not allowed to say anything that sounded like a diagnosis. Only psychologists and real professionals could do that. So Margie went on to the intermediate EMH class. It wasn't until the end of those 4 years that it was finally discovered Margie was deaf. She had taught herself to lip read and taught herself to speak with those keen eyes and enthusiasm for learning. After the proper diagnosis, Margie was sent to the St. Louis School for the Deaf. She progressed well, went to college, and became a teacher of the deaf. Now you know why vision and hearing testing are the first part of the process of special education. The rest of the story, Claude. He was quiet and kept to himself, but Claude could read and understood what he read. He never made eye contact and preferred to play alone. Lining up blocks was his favorite thing to do. At the time Mom and I knew Claude, we had just read a wonderful new book entitled Dibs, D-I-B-S, Dibs in Search of Self by Axline. We enjoyed talking about the book, which told of a little boy who would not socialize or talk to others. Dibs had taught himself to read under the bed covers with a flashlight. One theory presented was that Dibs's mother was too cold and had not bonded with him. But eventually, through play therapy, Dibs came out of his aloneness. Mom and I thought Claude was like Dibs. He just seemed too smart to be in the EMH room. What might we label both Claude and Dibs today? Did you guess autism or Asperger's syndrome? I think you'd be right. Now, I never met Dr. Billy Hawkins, but I wish I had. Billy's story is another example of misclassification, low expectations, and cultural bias in special education testing. So this shows you how important IDEA and the 6 principles of IDEA and quality procedures are. But of course, it can all fall apart if professionals don't value every student in every classroom. Each time we examine a disability, we will look at the IDEA definition and a professional advocacy organization's definition for that disability. This is the definition developed by the American Association on MR. It has recently changed its name to the American Association on IDD. They have embraced the term intellectual and developmental disability. Sometimes it is shortened to intellectual disability, ID. Intellectual disability connotes limitations in thinking. Developmental disability connotes that the limitations interfere with typical development of functions. I hope that with the next passage of IDEA, the federal government will change MR to IDD. It would be such a wonderful improvement. Along with AAIDD's definition, they have developed a theoretical model that addresses identification and planning for support to meet the individual's needs in a variety of settings. Note this still includes intellectual evaluation, but it is not the IQ that determines placement. That's the way the children were placed in my mom's EMH room, by their IQ numbers. The determination of needs are established through extensive functional assessment. This term is very literal. How does this student function in different settings, in different roles, and in different contexts? Next, AAIDD has developed a continuum that addresses the levels of support that individuals with IDD need. From this continuum, the AAIDD also proposes that classification of individuals with IDD be based upon the level of support that is needed. Let's look at the levels. Intermittent, as needed. And an example of that is when they lose their job or have a medical crisis or a death in the family, they may need some extra support to get through that. Limited, consistency but time limited. For example, employment training. They may need 6 months of intensive training on the job, but after that, the time's up, they've got it, and they don't need support anymore. Extensive, regular involvement, meaning daily, and not time limited in some sporting event on a horse. Extensive, regular involvement, meaning daily, and not time limited. This could be for an individual who can live and work independently, but cannot manage cooking, shopping, or banking, so they need help each day with those tasks. Pervasive, constant, high intensity, and potentially life-sustaining. Think about Christopher Reeves, the actor who played Superman. He had an accident and broke his neck. From then on, he needed daily, intensive care. Remember that Christopher was not cognitively impaired. He actually wrote 2 books after his accident. But the level of care that he needed to sustain his life was pervasive. When it comes to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we need to think possibilities. We need to think abilities, since research demonstrates that students with IDD make more progress in inclusive settings. Every teacher needs to know more about students with IDD. Set the expectations high, and they can succeed, because education should be special. Thanks for listening.